spending constraints so that Washington can't just keep borrowing from future generations, that we hold Congress accountable. And time after time, when it comes to raising revenue or it comes to cutting spending, Congress says, well, let's just borrow more money. And I think state governments, city of Olathe, state of Kansas, all have a requirement that they live within their means, and yet Washington doesn't. And so we're selling treasury bonds to pay for day-to-day operations. Now this isn't to say that all debt is always bad. Sometimes we sell bonds for local schools. Sometimes we build a road. Those things are reasonable uses of debt in certain cases. But using debt to just pay for day-to-day operations is not a good way to run the federal government, and it's not working. It's putting us in a huge, huge deficit problem. So that being said, I think we need to put constraints in place on Congress, require a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, so that Washington folks there know they can't keep spending money they don't have, and they've got to make tough decisions. And that legislation didn't get there. And so I'm hopeful that we can go back to Congress this fall, and we can either use this committee, or we can use whatever mechanisms possible, that the two sides can sit down and work together. And let me be clear, I'm a Republican, but I can tell math pretty easy here, and I know that if you've got a Democratic Senate and a Democratic President, you're not passing something without the sides getting together and working out a solution. And so that means that we're going to have to sit down and work together. And that may mean there's some things that we can't get to a solution on, but we've got to start listening to one another, and we've got to start working together more in Congress. And I want to help be part of that, and I think we've got to focus on solutions. And every time something happens, you saw what happened when the S&P downgraded our ratings from a AAA to a AA+. You walk every talk show, what was happening? It's the other guy's fault, right? We're going to blame somebody else. Well, let's be leaders. Let's talk about solutions. And I will tell you, I don't have every solution. It's one of the reasons I want to do meetings like this, because I want to talk to you about what solutions you favor. And I understand some folks are going to say, listen, you got to raise taxes on the rich. Some folks are going to say you got to raise taxes on oil companies. Some folks are going to say, don't touch taxes, we got to cut spending. That's the kind of conversation that's useful, that's important, and I hope folks will do that. And Congress needs to be able to have that debate, as opposed to getting in their corners and saying, I'm not going to listen to the other side, and I'm not going to talk about it. I think there's a way we can work something out. I'm happy to visit about that tonight. On the economy, what we've got to do to get this economy growing again, we've got to get small business owners creating jobs. 7 out of 10 jobs created in this country are created by small business owners. They're not created by Washington jobs. They're not created by government jobs. They're created by entrepreneurs and innovators right here in this district and all across the country, people who took a little risk, built a business, and took a little bit more risk when they made a little bit of profit. That's who puts people to work. They hire folks. And so we need to figure out a way to get those folks. There's money out there. We need to figure out how to get that money off the sidelines and get people reinvesting in the economy. I'm not talking about big government, I'm not talking about big business. I'm talking about mom and pop shops right here in Olathe and Overland Park, Lenexa, Kansas City, Lawrence, all across this district and all across this country. Those folks have to innovate and be entrepreneurs and create jobs if we're going to get this economy going again. And so if folks are in here, or small business owners you'd like to share, or business owners in general, you'd like to share what your thoughts are on that, and other folks who see other issues will share those as well. But I'm looking to figure out how we can get this economy sparked and going. And that'll solve several problems. One, the 14 million Americans who are looking for work, well, some of them get to go back to work. They get to provide for their families. They get to do what all of us want to do, realize the American dream. And the other thing it does is that when people start working again, what do? They start paying taxes. And so they pay into the city, they pay into our schools, they pay into state and federal government, they pay Social Security, they pay Medicare. And that economic growth is a critical component to getting our country back on the right track again. And so at this point, I'd love to take questions, comments, thoughts, and have an open dialogue here with folks in the room. So we'll kind of go from there. Tim, we'll go back here to the gentleman in the hat.
Yeah, this is a jobs question, and it has to do with renewable energy. The category of industry in Kansas that has the greatest potential for job creation is with the wind industry. To really stimulate that category, we need your support in passing a renewable electricity standard. Right now, Congress is going to be considering either a renewable electricity standard or a clean energy standard. I ask that you please oppose the clean energy standard. It would actually hurt wind development here, because that includes nuclear power and natural gas, neither of which are renewable, both of which are far too expensive and would contribute to killing job development here. Can we count on you to support a renewable electricity standard that will lead to the creation of thousands of jobs in Kansas?
Okay, good question. I'm an all-of-the-above energy type of person. Grew up in rural Kansas, I see the potential for wind, and you and I have discussed it before, and I know you're a good advocate for that, and I appreciate you being here tonight to advocate for that point. I grew up near a town called Hutchinson. There actually Siemens came there and they're building turbines there, put 400 people to work, good paying jobs. So there are jobs that are being created in the renewable energy area. At the same time, we want to make sure that our energy is affordable. And so we want to ensure that as we produce energy, that beyond the economic side, that we have the affordability side. And so that's for low-income families, for all of us, that as our energy prices keep going up, that's a concern for Americans. And then the final issue is we need to be responsive to the environment. I think between the economy and the energy, its production itself, and the environment, that there's a balance we have to keep. I've not signed on to the renewable standard portfolio because I'm not necessarily a fan of putting more mandates in place. I would rather try to find incentives to encourage folks to use their own entrepreneurial ideas to make this more efficient so it outcompetes fossil fuels, as opposed to just say, well, fossil fuels are cheaper, so let's make fossil fuels more expensive, such as using cap and trade and other issues, or forcing industries to have a renewable portfolio standard. And so I appreciate the question. I'm happy to visit with you about it another time. You'd like to get me some more information on it. I'm open-minded on it, and you and I have talked about it before. I'm open-minded on it, but that's kind of where I am in the renewable portfolio standard, and I hope that answered your question. Yes, in the back, sir.
Yeah, Kemp, my question for you is, thank you for voting no on that recent bill before Congress. The question comes down to baseline budgeting. You're on a very powerful conference right now. Every year, spending goes up 7-8% as part of that baseline. This year's budget will be about $3.8 trillion roughly. 10 years from now, it's going to be $5 trillion. So when the partisanships comes, people say they cut this, this, and this. It's actually not a cut. There's additional monies there, but it's a cut in the rate of growth. Is that something that you would be willing to help with us?
Well, and I think that's probably why folks, one of the reasons, I know there's various reasons, that's one of the reasons some folks are frustrated with what's coming out of Congress right now to deal with these problems. By some estimates, the national debt could increase $13 trillion over the next 10 years. So our debt now is $14 trillion. In the next 10 years, it could be upwards of $27 trillion. So when we're talking about cutting $2 trillion off of a $13 trillion deficit, we're really debating about whether our debt in 10 years should be $25 trillion or $27 trillion. That's kind of a maddening debate to have, that we're just arguing about how deep in a hole we're going to be. And we all know individuals and businesses and folks who have taken on too much debt, and at some point the debt and interest becomes so overwhelming that you file bankruptcy because you can't keep up with the actual payments. And we've seen what's happening in Greece, where other countries are coming to Greece and saying, we're cutting you off, we're not going to loan you more money unless you take these measures. We don't want our country to be in a situation where other countries are dictating those types of terms. In fact, all the money we're borrowing now, it's a little bit less than 50% of those being borrowed from foreign countries. And half of that's being borrowed from China. And so as we deal with these emerging growing countries, we're going to be sending them huge interest payments. And in 10 years, by some estimates, our interest payments alone per year will be almost $1 trillion a year. That's more than we spend on Medicare, it's more we spend on Medicaid, it's more we spend on our entire defense budget. And so this is a national security issue, and the chairman, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, has said this is the biggest national security issue facing this country. And so I think one of the frustrations is it almost seems like it's getting to a point where it's almost unfixable, because I think people are feeling the frustration that, well, it's going to be 11 trillion more or 13 trillion more. And so that's why I think both sides are going to have to work together on this. I think we're going to have to put some constraints in place. That cut, cap, and balance was one proposal that passed that would put those constraints in place. And I understand that folks in the Senate didn't like all of that. Maybe that's a place where we could start, and the Senate could talk about what they want in that bill, and we could move forward. But I do think that's a good point to make. So, someone here? Yes, ma'am.
Well, I know jobs are needed out there. I know jobs are needed out there, but can the little businesses not have to have so much pressure on them, but can the big corporations be accountable for hiring? Because even though they get tax cuts or tax breaks or don't have to pay tax, they're not supporting the, I mean, how did we ever get into this unemployment like this? If the jobs are going overseas and they're not here to be had, then what can we do? Because people are hurting badly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks for your point on that. I think some of us are frustrated that some of these big companies aren't paying their share of taxes. For a lot of people say this is not fair, and we ought to. And this is actually a source of bipartisanship. There's a way, and this is maybe an area that's something we get done in this Congress. We could actually reform